the recent announcement of the One Piece remake, I want to take you back to the beginning of the series, the East Blue Saga, and my experience with it. I've been reacting and reviewing to every single episode for about 6 or 7 months now, and I thought it'd be fun to compile all of these episodes together and sort of edit them down to make them a bit more digestible, and sort of give my opinions throughout as well. So I'll be coming back every few episodes to sort of give my overview of what I think about the episodes now that it's been quite a while since I've seen them. So without further ado, let's start with the first 3 arcs of the East Blue Saga: Romance Dawn, Orange Town, and Syrup Village. So as of today, I'm going to be starting my journey through One Piece. Based on this first episode, I think I'm going to really enjoy this series. Luffy as a protagonist seems awesome, and I really like his design as well, and his powers being like this made out of rubber, I think could lead to a lot of interesting fights and scenarios. And I already love this show, to be honest. Zoro seems really badass. I thought Zoro was going to be the bad guy in this, but it turns out he's actually a really nice dude. He was protecting this girl and her mum from Helmappo. Luffy is going around trying to become the king of the pirates, but actually like solving a lot of issues, it seems like. Maybe that's going to be a theme of the series. Like now Zoro has officially joined Luffy on his squad, so he has a bit of a crew going now, even though his pirate ship is so small. I'm excited to see like Luffy. I imagine his crew's going to grow as well as his ship, so I feel like there's going to be a lot of progression in this series. There was a moment at the end of this flashback where that really shocked me, where Shanks essentially saves Luffy from being eaten by this giant creature that ate the bandit that was giving him grief earlier, and he loses his arm saving Luffy. That goes to show what sort of man Shanks is. Like, Luffy's crying. You got to think at this point, Luffy's literally a kid, and he's just seen this guy that he really looks up to lose his arm saving him, and he's crying and stuff like that, and it really hit me. And Shanks is just saying, like, says to him, like, don't worry, it's just an arm. Like, I owe you one. And it just goes to show the sort of dude that Shanks is. I really think he's great, and I'm excited at some point in the future. I'm sure Luffy is going to find Shanks again. I did not expect to get emotional watching One Piece this morning, but God, this episode absolutely killed me, man. A character called Shushu is actually just this little dog whose owner died, essentially, and they owned a pet shop together. And he's protecting it with his life in the town that Buggy's destroying, and that's his treasure as well. You know, the thing that he cares about most and wants to protect in the world. He refuses to move even when he's getting, like, hit about by Buggy's minions and this giant beast. Even though he's just this little dog. Bro, it killed me. It turns out Clahador, you know, Kaya's butler, is not who he says he is at all. He's actually a pirate called Kuro, who's basically notorious for being brutal and cunning and extremely evil. Captain Kuro versus Luffy is officially underway, and it started off with Luffy smashing him in the face with a massive boulder. And I love the line by Luffy that he said to Captain Kuro in this episode. He said, "What do you take your friends for?" As Captain Kuro is basically cutting them down with this technique that he's using called out the back attack, which is an insane name. And another line that Luffy said in this episode to Captain Kuro was, "You'll never be better than Usopp," which I thought was brilliant, because Captain Kuro has this massive crew, this huge reputation. He's like this notorious pirate, and Luffy saying because of his character, you know, Usopp is just better as a crew leader. Wow, this arc was absolutely incredible. I just finished watching the final episode of the Captain Kuro arc, and I can't believe how amazing this was. Considering it was only a few episodes long as well, it feels like how invested I got in these characters, and this story was insane. But yeah, that was the beginning of One Piece. The first 3 arcs, I think, did a great job in establishing some of the main characters, you know, Luffy, Zoro, Nami, Usopp, and I think it did a good job of introducing us into this sort of world and the Great Pirate Era, sort of lore bits like that. There was a great villain in Captain Kuro. I thought he sort of started the whole villains in One Piece being absolutely fucking terrible people, which is a theme we will continue to see as we go along. But nothing particularly crazy happened during these arcs, looking back. But it was still, I think, a very solid start to the series. Now on to the Baratie Arc, which I say wrong every single time. Kuina died, and God, when Zoro gets told this news, he goes to train even harder. And when he's speaking to Kuina's dad about it, and he breaks down in tears saying, "I've got to keep my promise of being the world's greatest swordsman," it fucking broke me, man. I got like such a thump in my chest. Sanji again humiliated him, and then hit on his missus, break-danced, and then beat the shit out of Captain Fullbody. I couldn't believe it, bro. How disrespectful can you be? I'm interested to see how Sanji interacts with the Going Merry with Luffy's crew. Who is Hawkeye and why is he so goddamn strong? And is he just the tip of the iceberg for the Grand Line? I'm not too sure, but in this episode we got a bit more context on the Grand Line in general and the threats that can come from it. This episode of One Piece feels like such a massive turning point in the series, not just for Zoro and his place in the world, but the perspective of where we are in general, the size of the ocean. It feels like the East Blue is just like a grain of sand in an endless beach that has yet to be explored. Mihawk has come along from the Grand Line and made a fool of him, essentially. And it's not just the fact that Mihawk beat him, it's the way he beat him. He didn't even use his main sword, at least not till the end. He brought out a little knife, essentially, just to prove the gap between him and Zoro. I can't imagine the perspective shift that Zoro must have. He must be like, wow, you know, in the context of this world, I'm nothing. So we finally got the backstory and the context between Sanji and Zeph and why they care so much about this restaurant, the Baratie, and why they care so much about not letting anybody starve or go without food. And it's even more tragic than I expected. Can't imagine like a scarier situation, being in this place where you have absolutely no hope, nobody's coming to rescue you, you don't have any food. It's awful. And there's something really beautiful and tragic about this whole situation. These two that came together under these circumstances, originally basically as like enemies pretty much, but have been brought together by this shared desire to reach the All Blue. So this was the official end to the Baratie arc, and I've got to say, I couldn't have even imagined a more perfect and beautiful and tearjerker ending if I tried. So the Baratie arc to me is probably the first great One Piece arc. It's not as good as some of the future ones, but it was the first one where I watched it and I thought, wow, this series is incredible. The writing is fantastic, and the previous 3 arcs were really good as well, and some really good moments. But the introduction to Sanji, his backstory, what happened with Mihawk and Zoro, it just had so many amazing moments, and this was the arc that made me think, oh shit, this show is it's got something cooking. And then Arlong Park happened. So we're heading to Arlong Park after the amazing Baratie arc. This is the next destination, and the leader, Arlong, is extremely powerful. This episode absolutely hit me like a ton of bricks, man. Like the death of Bellemere might be the most tragic death so far, the most tragic thing in the series so far. I got such a lump in my throat just watching this episode, especially when she was eventually shot in front of Nami and Nojiko. I couldn't believe it. There's one thing that One Piece knows how to do well, that's tell a fucking good story, get you hooked, invested, and then rip your heart out. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it does it so well. Building up these characters, and like you fall like in love with them and you're invested in them, and then something like this to happen is horrendous, bro. Like, it's awful. In this episode of One Piece, Nami is broken. She's lost absolutely everything. He is the biggest piece of shit alive. And to top it all off, he says to her, if you run away, I'll kill everybody in Kokoyashi village. So once again, she's stuck. She has to get that 100 million berries again. At least that's what she thinks. And she just can't escape. She's never, ever going to be free from this guy. And after this follows one of the most devastating scenes I think I've ever seen in an anime. In absolute agony, Nami falls to her knees on the floor, and she grabs her knife and she starts trying to stab out the tattoo she has for Arlong. Eventually she stops and she's quiet, and she turns with tears in her eyes and says, help me. And bro, it hit so fucking hard. All this time she's been fighting on her own, refusing anybody's help because she doesn't want anyone else to get hurt. She doesn't want what happened to Bellemere to happen to anybody else, any of her other friends. She's refused help from everybody for so long, essentially her whole life. And now it's got to the point where she's so desperate and she's so broken and everything's gone so wrong, she has to ask Luffy for help. And yeah, when that happens, literally my heart sunk. Arlong finally got something that's been coming to him for the last 8 years, and that is a punch square in the jaw delivered by the one and only Luffy. And Luffy's reason for doing all this is so simple, yet like beautiful. He just says, how dare you make our navigator cry? And that's all it takes. You know, that's Luffy's friend. The fact that Arlong did that to her, he doesn't even need to know the context of what he did. Just the fact that he's made her cry is enough to make Luffy go, right, I'm going to go kick the shit out of this dude. Nami has finally freed herself from Arlong's grasp after 8 years of torture, essentially working for this guy. I love the metaphor that they used with the butterfly and the spider, and how the spider was about to eat the butterfly. And once Nami said that she was going to, you know, put her faith in Luffy, the butterfly was freed. It's symbolic of Nami flying away from this web that she's been caught in for the last 8 years of Arlong. The long-anticipated fight between Luffy and Arlong is in full swing in this episode, and it is my favourite fight so far for so many reasons. His jaws are terrifying. They could cut through anything. They could cut through bone. They could break bones, crush pillars, all that sort of stuff. Like, just watching Arlong actually fight Luffy is really scary, and like I said, it's just how you would sort of expect him to fight. If I could describe this episode of One Piece in one word, it would be catharsism. Seeing Arlong finally get what was coming to him, seeing his empire literally crumble before him because of Luffy and the collective effort of the village that he overtook and he tormented for these past 8 years was just the best thing to see. A big part of this episode was Luffy actually destroying the room that Nami had been making all these sea charts in for Arlong, and I think it was really symbolic of this was like the last chain that Nami had to Arlong, and you can see it when he's destroying all these parts, and you see, you know, all these sea charts getting chucked out of the building and her desk. It cuts to Nami and she's crying and saying thank you, because like I said, this is like the last link that she has to Arlong. The ending of the incredible, the emotional, the perfect Arlong Park arc. This episode and finale for the Arlong Park arc just gave me like the warmest feeling inside. Seeing the whole village celebrate after 8 years of living under tyranny of Arlong and the torture they've all been through, including Nami, of course, was so heartwarming to see. Luffy now has a 30 million berry bounty on his head. I feel like this is going to change the entire dynamic of the series and the way it's gone so far. To this day, this is one of my favourite arcs in One Piece, or anime in general. I've watched about 400 episodes of One Piece so far, and there has been some amazing arcs. Enies Lobbies, you know, Water 7, Thriller Bark. I'm currently on Sabayodi Arc, Alabasta, but Arlong Park always sticks out in my mind as when I saw One Piece elevate to a whole different level for me. The storytelling in this arc was so high level. Nami's whole story with what happened with her and Arlong and how she was this slave to him, essentially having to work for her. You know how the story goes. I've said about it a million times, but Arlong Park is fucking fantastic, and I still think it is probably the best arc in One Piece, or one of them. It's one of the best arcs in One Piece. Maybe Enies Lobby's better, I don't know, but it's fantastic, and it's definitely, to me, the best arc in the East Blue Saga. I think a lot of people probably agree with that. So Luffy's crew has finally arrived in Loguetown, the town known as the beginning and the end, and we got to see the actual execution of Gold Roger. He reminds me a little bit of Luffy in that regard, and considering Luffy wants to become the king of the pirates, to share that sort of resemblance, I think is quite interesting. Something really interesting happened in this episode of One Piece, which I think could change the future of the show entirely. Literally, the fate has been changed of these people, of these pirates. For some reason, there's some being out there that has changed fate completely. It looked like Luffy was supposed to die, but there's something out there looking out for him. Like, it's not supposed to happen yet. Like, there's something looking over the timeline that's saying, nope, this isn't right. You know, it's weird. Like, a corrective action was taken by something. In the world of One Piece, everybody is pursuing a dream, and we saw that at the end of this episode as the crew were heading towards the Grand Line. We had Luffy saying how he's heading there to become the king of the pirates. We had, you know, Usopp saying he wanted to be a brave pirate of the sea. Nami wanted to create a world map. Sanji wanted to get to the All Blue, and Zoro wanted to become a master swordsman. I can't lie, I got chills when they were all talking about heading to the Grand Line and speaking about their dreams. But given the last episode of One Piece, it seems like everything in this world potentially is already destined to happen. Fate cannot be changed. So I guess that's where the winds of fate are taking them, to the Grand Line. I can't wait to get there. I can't imagine what's there. You know, all the strongest things we've seen so far have come from the Grand Line. You know, Arlong and Mihawk, and you know, we've heard legends about it, so I can't wait to actually see what it looks like and actually get to the Grand Line. I think it's going to be so exciting, and I can't fucking wait. And finishing off the East Blue Saga, of course, was the Loguetown Arc, and this was great for learning a little bit more about the history of the world of One Piece and setting up for the future with them heading towards the Grand Line. Learning Luffy's connection to Gold Roger, you know, Goldie Roger, I thought was really interesting, and the whole Winds of Fate scenario, which still hasn't really even been answered yet, is really exciting. I'm still thinking about that to this day. But this was a great end to the East Blue Saga, sort of opening up the rest of the world before they got to the Grand Line. This was a great way to finish the East Blue Saga, I think. But yeah, overall, I thought the East Blue Saga was a fantastic start to the series. It set up a lot of future events, a lot of really interesting stories, backstories. We got to learn a lot about the characters, fell in love with the Straw Hats during the East Blue Saga before we got introduced to even more characters later on. But this did a great job in establishing the world of One Piece and its characters and the motivations of certain characters and the world itself. I thought it did a really good job in establishing all of these things, and One Piece just got better and better after they eventually got to the Grand Line. But in terms of the beginning of a series, I think the East Blue Saga did its job, and it had some really fantastic moments and arcs. So yeah, I thought it was really good. But let me know if you want to see me do the same thing for future arcs, you know, Alabasta, Enies Lobby, you know, whatever else, let me know. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you all in a bit. Peace.